Hey guys, we are live. Welcome to Theory of Entertainment. My name is Lex, and excuse me, and this is day four, I believe, of my 100 days of streaming. I think it's day four. I gotta check the list of videos here, but today's stream is going to be a bit shorter. It is the weekend. It is Saturday. So I'm gonna try and keep this a bit brief, but I think it's still important to go online and stream. This weekend is also a special weekend because it is the weekend that Spider-Man: Brand New Day does get released in theaters. So it's been a couple days now. I've seen the movie already. I think it's great. I'm excited to see it again. I'm gonna check it out again at some point over the next week, maybe once or twice. But yeah, I want to talk a little bit about that movie in particular and sort of what's happening right now with that film. So I'm going to get into that in a moment. But for those of you who are new here, this is Theory of Entertainment. My name is Lex, and what we do is we essentially believe that there's no such thing as entertainment, that the things that we watch are more than just mere passages of time. They're more than just a fun thing that you watch to sort of let your brain rot, essentially. We do believe that there's something to do with entertainment in that when we're watching something, we're actually learning something simultaneously. And one sort of facilitates the other. And the more entertaining something is, the better it actually can be at teaching you something interesting or special, right? A good example is like when you have a lecture and it's a super boring lecture, even though there's tons of information that may have some substance within that lecture, because of how boring the delivery is, you're not taking in any of that information. And what entertainment is that you can still get a ton of substance from the entertainment, but it's delivered in such a way that's so engaging that you don't even realize you're taking in anything at all, really. And that's the fascinating part about it, because you have to kind of pause, look back, and actually reflect on what you just watched to see what actually you picked up from it. And I think that's a beautiful, beautiful thing. Uh, it's an amazing way, I think, to learn. And in particular, this channel exists explicitly so that we can dive into media and really, really dig into it as much as possible to gather as many nuggets as possible to bring into our day-to-day lives, because ultimately what matters is what you do, and what you watch will ultimately change what you do, whether you know it or not. And yeah, that's the gist of the theory here. And today I want to talk about Spider-Man: Brand New Day in particular, because the movie is exceeding all expectations. Like seriously, I think going into the weekend, maybe last week, let's say, there were projections, financially speaking, for the movie. It's a little early, right? We haven't gone through the entire weekend yet. It might make more or less money. But I remember seeing early projections for the weekend being something like 700 million worldwide, which is absolutely nuts and insane for any movie in general. But any movie in this movie going climate, meaning that nowadays people don't tend to go to the theater nearly as much as they used to. I remember checking ChatGPT, and it was comparing things from like 2019, which was I think the biggest theater going year ever, right? And now, and the drop off is something like close to 30-40% less people going to theaters than they were before. So when a movie does really well now, it's a big deal because movies typically are not as big of a draw as they used to be. And when looking at expectations for this movie, it was expected to do 700 million over the weekend, which is already nuts. And I'm seeing reports now that Spider-Man: Brand New Day could potentially net up to 900 million over the weekend. 900 million over the weekend. This is like video game numbers. And what I mean by video game is if you look at something like, hold on, hold on. Babe, you okay? What happened? Huh? Okay. I'll be back, guys. Hold on. Whew, okay, sorry about that. Yeah, my wife needed me, but I am back. Okay, so I think I remember what I was talking about. 900 million, exceeding expectations so far, at least. We'll see if it actually hits that number towards the end of the weekend. To be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if it does a billion. And what I mean by video game numbers is video games tend to cost more than, say, movies do typically. So, usually speaking, a game can make a ton more money a lot faster. And I remember there was a point in time where the fastest media property to gross $1 billion was Grand Theft Auto 5, I think it was. Yeah, I think it was Grand Theft Auto 5. And at the time, the record was held by, I believe it was Avatar, which was like a billion in a month or something like that. And GTA 5 did like a billion in 3 days, 72 hours, which is wild, right? And Spider Man is on pace to do those types of numbers, which is crazy, absolutely crazy. But I think this speaks to something, right? There's been voices and thoughts, right, that the things that people have been talking about, essentially, that the superhero movie is done, right? That it's going to go the way of the Western, that people are no longer going to watch or care for these films. That's been a very strong notion, right? And I mean, you hear it from everyone, you hear it everywhere, and it's been the case for a very, very long time that people have been saying that. And I disagree with that notion. The simple reason being is that I think that a superhero film has way more range than what a Western might have. To give a great example, you have superhero films that are Westerns, right? Uh, Logan, one might argue, is just that, right? There's such a insane amount of flexibility with the genre itself, with the type of movies you can make from it. So we've not even close to exhausted what is possible with superheroes. Not even close. And I think Spider Man Brand New Day is an excellent example of what I mean by that in terms of the levels in which it goes deep when it comes to the emotional pull that they put the audience through. It's I mean it's a roller coaster at times, like a shocker in terms of what happens in the movie. You know, it's absolutely nuts, right? But there's something special about these types of movies that go beyond your typical movie. And it's also why over the last, I don't know, 15 to 20 years, there's been no other genre that has come close to competing with these things in terms of box office numbers and in terms of actual ratings themselves. Like there's something there, right? There's this thing that people will say where movies are completely subjective, right? That it's everyone else's opinion, right, on whether or not a movie's good. But when you look at something like this film, and nearly everyone's opinion of the film is that it's phenomenal, right? And this is regardless of if the person is a you know a critic or just a regular person across the street, you're no longer looking at something that is simply just subjective at that point in terms of those opinions. There's something there. People are seeing something special about this movie and something special about the medium itself. And I think there's no other superhero character that represents the what's the word here, that represents the sheer potential of what superheroes can be and do other than Spider-Man. I think that that character specifically has captured such an amazing aspect of the character itself. Initially, you had characters like Batman and Superman, right? Which kind of fit these archetypes uh, of superhero characters that are very, very unique, right? And then those characters can do incredibly well. But there's something special about the mix that Stan Lee and I think it's Steve Ditko were able to put together with Spider-Man in terms of meshing his, personal life, his everyday life with his superhero life and really showcasing the problems that he has and that he has to face. And despite having those problems, going out there and doing what he needs to do as a hero. I think that's so powerful and so important because for people like us, right? For the regular average everyday person, you're dealing with stuff. You're dealing with drama, with issues, with difficulties. And yet, despite those things that you're dealing with, you still need to be able to put on your suit, get up and go to work, whatever that work might look like. And you need to be able to do it with, a smile on sometimes, depending on what kind of line of work you're in, right? But there's something to that in terms of relating to that aspect of the character that not necessarily isn't really there for, say, a Superman or a Batman, right? And wasn't really there until that character was introduced. And what this marks in terms of Spider-Man Brand New Day, I believe, is something very, very special. And what I mean by it is that we haven't seen something this big probably since the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man movie. And what I mean by that is, going into that movie, right? Superhero characters in particular were starting to be taken more seriously in terms of the appeal of the character, right? And the box office appeal and the potential of the character. And then Spider-Man 1 comes out. And not only does it come out, but it's the kind of superhero movie that was unapologetically comical, unapologetically a comic book movie. And I say that because X-Men, which I think came out 2000, the year before, whenever it did come out, it was a superhero movie, but it was kind of trying not to be a superhero movie. There were no bright colors at all with any of the costumes, no spandex. They even make fun of the aspect of that. So much of that was sort of shied away from. That was, people were essentially scared of it, afraid of it, right? And X-Men still did incredibly well. So despite covering up what makes this genre what it is, it was still able to be incredibly successful. And then Spider-Man, what it did really nicely is it peeled off the layer of what was missing, right? In terms of the bright costume, right? The bright colored costume. That Sam Raimi Spider-Man costume was incredible. It looked great. They didn't shy away from the colors. They didn't make it, dark and leather and all that kind of stuff, right? And that movie was able to do incredibly well at the time, right? Despite all its, flaws that may have been there, right? Which weren't that many. Now, what's really cool and interesting about this Spider-Man movie is it's also incredibly successful. It's also doing really, really well this weekend so far. And yet, it's also very, very comic book. It's one of the most comic book movies ever made in terms of just the sheer number of things that are in there that fit, reading a comic book in regards to the attention to detail. Like there's so many clips that you have in the movie that are just panels ripped straight out of multiple comic covers, multiple comic books, whatever the case is. You just have so many of these things that have been out there, and all of them, all of which have served to some degree and some extent to be helpful, right, to other people that are out there. So to me, this movie does a really, really good job of being unapologetically a comic book through and through, all the way through. And I think it marks something special and different in that we've had a season where these movies have not performed and they have not done nearly as well as they should have, right? And essentially, the word on the street is superhero fatigue. That there's this idea that, you know, people don't want to see these things anymore. And I'm laughing because obviously it's not the case here. People do want to see these things. They just want to see them done right. They want to see them done with care, and they want to see them done with a level of seriousness that's involved here. You can tell that Tom Holland, that the director, that all these people, they're working at this not because it's just a paycheck or just because it's going to be a piece of entertainment for people to listen to. They understand that it's more than just entertainment. It's more than just this thing that passes the time. That there's something to their craft that they have to take seriously, that they have to really hone and be effective with it. When you watch Tom Holland in this movie and you watch his performance and you watch the nuances with his performance and you watch the care that he took into this character, he's taking it seriously. This movie is doing well, but to be real, this movie was bound to do well. Tom Holland didn't have to come on set and do all that he did. He didn't have to work out as much as he did for this movie to do well. He could have phoned it in, and the movie still would have done $500 million, right? It wasn't necessary for that kind of effort. From the director's point of view, from the other actors, from all that was involved here, they didn't have to take this as seriously as they did, right? But I think that there's something there where working in a way where they believe that what they're producing, what they're doing is not just, uh, again, it's not just a mere pastime. It's not just a waste of time, that there's value represented in what they're producing and that it matters in what they're doing. And because of that, you're able to see that ooze through the film. It shines through. You feel that love, that connection that they have with this product that they want to bring out into their audiences. And that is very, very, very important and incredibly felt for this film. So I'm excited because I want to go check it out again because there's so much other stuff I wasn't even able to take a look at, that I wasn't even able to fully grasp. But there's something to what is going on right now and what's happening with this film, and I'm definitely looking forward to and excited for what's coming next. Personally, I thought that the movie would do well, but I also thought that come the end of the year with Avengers Doomsday, that would sort of be the official, moment in which everyone is back into the MCU mode and everyone is actually anticipating the next MCU movie, whatever that is, to be an incredible outing, an incredible night out. That's honestly what I expected. But I stand corrected. It looks like Spider-Man Brand New Day is actually that film. It's that movie that is essentially showing that it is a brand new day, essentially, right? It's perfectly titled. In that, from this moment going forward, we're going to be getting better superhero stories. We're going to be getting, in fact, the best superhero stories we've gotten ever before. I truly do believe that because the genre itself is maturing, because the group of people working on these films are also maturing as well. What I mean by that is when you had movies, for example, in the 2000s that were made, right? Oftentimes, the person that's a director, they didn't go into film school to make superhero movies. They didn't go into film school to say, hey, I want to make the next Punisher film, or I want to make the next Spider-Man movie, or I want to make the next X-Men movie. That wasn't who these directors were. It just weren't their interest. They didn't care about it in that way. Look at someone like Bryan Singer, right? He would have read and done his research on the comics for X-Men, but in reality, he wasn't that big into the franchise going into it, right? And there wasn't that level of respect that there is for the industry back then as well. But now what you have is something interesting, where you have a crop of directors, for example, that have come up within the industry that grew up with superhero films, that grew up with superhero properties, and actually respect the material and actually look forward to working with these actors and putting something together with these people. And to me, that's something that's absolutely incredible, because what you have now is, before, it's like they had to work really hard to find a director that is willing to do a superhero movie that actually respects the properties. And now you have like this crop of directors that are all super talented, that went to film school and all that fun stuff, but also have a genuine love and care for these characters. I think a prime example of that is someone like Ryan Coogler. Ryan Coogler genuinely enjoys the comic characters, not just Black Panther, but X-Men and so on. He really has a passion for these characters. He grew up on them. And for him to do a comic book movie, it's a big deal for him. And he respects the material very, very well. But what's interesting about that is we're in an era now where, say, a Ryan Coogler, for example, has actually done really big films outside of the superhero space and is actually maturing as a director. He's becoming a better director, right? And he's able to then bring that maturity and that skill set back into the superhero space to create something special. And he's not the only director in that realm and in that space doing it that way. There's multiple others that are coming and that are going to be able to do that. So we're getting in a really interesting space here where we're now going to be getting not just the best directors, but also some of the best actors. See, back in the day, when you had a superhero movie, you would hire some actors that wouldn't necessarily be big names, right? But you would still get them in the movie because you need someone casted for the film, right? But nowadays, you have situations where actors like, say, Ryan Gosling, who's probably one of the biggest actors in Hollywood right now, is coming to Marvel asking them to do a superhero movie specific to a character that they want, right? Most recently, Mahershala Ali was, going to do a Marvel movie as well and become Blade. It didn't work out. It looks like it hasn't worked out, but nonetheless, he's a great actor. And what I'm getting at here is you're having a situation now where you're getting some of the best directors, you're getting some of the best actors, you're getting some of the biggest budgets, right? And you have something special in terms of what we have yet to see from these movies. And then the last point here, in terms of why I think we're about to head into sort of a brand new day, let's say a renaissance of superhero movies, might I say a new golden age of superhero movies, is because there's something that writers, directors, producers are starting to pick up and learn, right? Which is this idea of how to tell a mature superhero story. Because when you think about it, typically superhero stories are for children, they're for kids, they're for teenagers, they're for young folks, right? But what you can see from Spider-Man Brand New Day, and what you can see from series like Invincible and other newer superhero properties, is that they're starting to understand better how to write something that is for a young adult, that is for someone in their 30s, that is for someone in their 40s or their 50s, and have actual themes that specifically speak to those instances and those moments. You're starting to see that maturity happen. In the next Avengers Doomsday movie that's coming up, we haven't seen it much from the trailers, but one of the big themes in that film is going to be surrounding fatherhood specifically, right? So there's going to be a lot of specifically there's going to be a lot of fatherhood related themes throughout that film, and it's going to be really focused on fathers, at least from what I'm seeing so far. And those are themes that are more mature in nature. We just had the Fantastic Four movie, and how that was centered a lot surrounding Sue Storm, and not just Sue Storm, but motherhood in particular, and how those themes surround that topic were sort of woven into that film, right? And that was a really interesting thing to see, because you don't typically get that from these movies that are supposed to be for children, right? And what you're getting here is an evolution of the product, an evolution of the brands. And we're starting to see something very, very special, because we're now going to start exploring different things that were not explored before in the past, because those other things were done and done well, or done properly. So I'll give an example here, is that typically when you have a superhero movie, the whole point of a superhero movie is to teach, let's say, someone who's younger, a key principle that's important for them to know as they're growing up, right? A good example is how Spider-Man is all about, with great power comes great responsibility, right? So this idea that as you have power, you have to use that responsibly, or else if you don't use it responsibly, others are hurt in the process, right? And that's essentially what that theme is. And that's what that character represents throughout most of his stories, and many of his greatest stories involve that. So that is still a simple theme, and a theme that you would teach normally to someone who's younger, let's say children, right? But it's a little more nuanced and more complex, but still it's a simple theme. And that's the general rule, is that with great power comes great responsibility. That's the general rule. Now what happens is that anyone who's lived a little bit knows that yes, you have your rules, but you also have your exceptions, and every rule has its exceptions. Now the thing about exceptions is that they're really specific, they're precise. An exception usually involves a bunch of different scenarios that are exceptional, and from that what you get is then having to bend or shift that rule in some way, and that is something that is different. So maybe 80% of the time you follow the rule, right? With great power comes great responsibility. But then there's this other 20% of the time where you might have to switch that up. And what we're about to see here, and what an adult superhero film does, or superhero property does, is that it takes a look at that other 20% and what happens in that other 20%, and tries to teach those differences. A great example of that is if you take a look at something like Invincible. It's very much inspired by DC Comics, right? It's quite obvious with a lot of those characters, but also one of the things it's inspired by is Spider-Man as well. And one thing that's huge with DC characters, and with Spider-Man as well, is this aspect of the character where they do not kill no matter what, that they cannot kill with the power that they have. It's this idea that they, have to be responsible with that power, right? So no matter what, under any circumstances, should they kill. Now, obviously, that's a case that makes sense, right? But there are nuances to that rule. There are exceptions to that rule. And typically a child superhero story cannot play with those nuances yet, because the child or the young person still has to learn the initial rule. and learn it well. So what something like Invincible does that's really good is that in Invincible, they know that you know that rule. They know you've watched hundreds of hours of superhero stuff. They know that you understand that. But they then ask the question, yeah, but when should that rule be broken? And that's what you get with a lot of season 2 in particular with Invincible and onward, right? Which is sort of exploring that concept of when should a hero take a life, right? And the reason why that's important and that's really real is this is a real thing in real life. As someone who is, let's say, a firefighter, maybe not necessarily a fighter, maybe not necessarily a firefighter, but someone that's, say, a police officer, right? Or a cop. They're put into situations where at times they have to take a life. And they have to know when and when not to be able to do that. And if they didn't know that, then a lot more people would die and be harmed or hurt by it. So what that is sort of displaying that. But it's not just limited to police officers. You have civilians as well who also need to know when to and when not to kill. Because there are circumstances or situations where a civilian may find themselves in a circumstance where they have to do that difficult thing. And what these stories tend to do and help is they explore those exceptions. They explore those aspects of things. And from that exploration, they come up with some sort of conclusion based upon that. And how well that is executed or not will dictate how good the property is or not. But what's really cool about that is that we haven't done that very often in the superhero space. We just have not, especially when it comes to movies. Most films that come out with heroes typically are not exploring that, 15 to 20% of the time where you have to make those exceptions to rules. And what's really cool about this Spider-Man movie and this Brand New Day is that it is also exploring that aspect of things. In this movie, it's kind of exploring a little bit, and I'm not going to get too much into spoilers here. I'm going to do a spoiler review at some point over the next couple of days to really, really dive deeper into this, sink my teeth into it. Before I do that, I do want to digest. Okay. Before I dive into that, I do want to digest the movie some more. I'll watch it a few times and kind of see if what I'm seeing makes sense. Because the first time you watch a movie, I mean, come on, there's always sort of like this haze in front of you and you're not seeing some of the flaws, right? But I will do a spoiler review at some point. So if you're interested in that, give me, a like and a subscribe, and hopefully, ring that bell icon, and it'll get me into your algorithm and you'll be able to see when that spoiler review comes out. But specifically here, in the movie, one of the themes that Peter has to sort of deal with is mosquito. All right. So one of the things that Peter has to deal with is he has to figure out when is it that he should not essentially use his powers. And what I mean by that is when should he not work, right? When should he be responsible? Like, when is it responsible to not go out there and fight crime, right? Because his whole idea is with great power comes great responsibility. And there's this time where, I mean, we all know this, Uncle Ben gets shot because he did not use his powers to help someone else. So now he needs to, at all times, use his powers to help others, because if he doesn't, something bad could happen. But the thing about that is that there are nuances and exceptions to where someone does need to stop and does need to take a break and does need to recenter themselves. And it's actually responsible to do that. And that is a really adult thing. And Peter has to learn that throughout the movie and throughout this film. And he's not able to take things to the next level unless he does learn that. And that's really huge, because I'm just speaking personally. I've had many instances in my life where I've had to learn this lesson. I've had to burn out, like genuinely burn out, to the point where I think I was working something like 30, 40 hours a week at one point, and I had to drop it to like 10, 15 hours. And like my body just gave out on me. And it was because I didn't know this. I didn't learn this lesson prior to that. And because of that, I didn't take rest seriously. And it destroyed me. And I had to learn along the way how to take rest seriously. So now when there's a holiday, I actually take time off on the holiday. I take the time to plan for things and plan for days off. And plan for future days off, right? Because I understand the importance of rest, and it's actually responsible to rest because your resting is actually what allows you to be ready to perform. To the extent in which I genuinely believe that if you're about to do something, the first thing you should do is rest. Rest up and make sure you're ready for the thing you're about to take on. And that's hugely important. So that's something I learned just through living years. It probably took 14, 15 years maybe to really fully grasp that effectively and execute on it, to where I haven't had a burnout in an incredibly long time now. And I'm doing actually way more than I was doing back then. But the burnouts are not happening simply because I had to learn this principle. But what we're doing here in the movie, at least, is that Pete gets to learn that principle. He gets to learn that there are times when you need to rest. There are times when you need to take it easy. There are times when you need to spend time with your friends. And that's just something you need to do, right? And that's something that matters and is actually integral to you. And unless you do that, you actually can't go to the next level, which is actually ironic because you would think that just working, and just focusing on your craft is all that you need to do to be successful. But the reality of the situation is that you also need that downtime. You also need those other aspects. So this is a great example here of the nuances of a principle at play, right? The exceptions of a principle at play. And the movie is exploring that. And that's something that we haven't had in superhero properties before. In fact, this is probably one of, if not the first, I think, Spider-Man media properties that have been released that is exploring this concept of Spidey. If I'm not mistaken, I've seen a lot of Spider-Man stuff. There might have been stuff I missed, but this is the first time I've seen this explored in any of his properties. And I say that to say that this is because they've noticed this and have been able to create an adult theme to put into a Spider-Man movie. And you have the Punisher in here, which is great, but what makes something adult is not the cussing, it's not the killing, it's the theme and the difference in how it's being executed. Taking a look at those nuances, taking a look at those exceptions and exploring them. And I'm really excited here because I'm telling you, it is a brand new day where at Marvel, specifically, they're leading the way here, is that they're learning this and now executing and exploring it over these next few films. So I'm telling you, like, we're about to get some of the best superhero stuff we have seen, period, bar none. With X-Men around the corner and what we see in this film, cooking things up for that future, I mean, we're we're about to be in for something. We are about to be in for something. I think this is going to be bigger. This decade is probably going to be bigger for the X-Men than the 90s were. And that's a big statement because till this day, Jim Lee's costumes are still represented for those characters till this day and still beloved from those characters till this day. But I'm telling you that over the next 7 to 10 years, there's something brewing that's going to be very, very special. And boy, oh boy, am I excited. But that's all I got for you guys today here. And that's all I'm going to talk about for today because I'm going to go spend some time with my wife. I need it. There you go. Taking some advice from from the Brand New Day movie, right? I'm going to take some time to rest, hang out, and I'll be back again tomorrow with another stream. Most likely going to be longer in regards to what we're going to talk about. But ultimately here, I just wanted to take some time to talk about my thoughts on the moment right now and what's going on with Brand New Day and what's going on with the industry so far and what we're expecting going forward. We're really, really, really in for something. I'm not even playing. And yeah, that's it for now. With that said, this has been Theory of Entertainment. I'm your man Lex, and I'll see you guys in the next upload. Peace.